Today we're going to be taking a look at a movie that demonstrates the dangers of letting the Spanish get married. Rec 3, directed by Paco Plaza, who co-directed the previous movies, attempts to shake up the already pre-established formula created by the first two movies, and instead says, nah, I'm bored of that, let's do something else. By 2011 to 2012, when this movie was released, the found footage genre that helped be revived by the likes of Paranormal Activity and the original Rec, just like what the Paranormal Activity franchise would go on to become, had started to become incredibly stale. So instead of doing found footage, Paco would decide to do something completely different, like creating a wedding movie that's been burnt to a DVD, something that we used to do in the ancient times. And like a wedding movie that's been burnt to a DVD, I mean actually a wedding movie that's been burnt to a DVD, as that's how the movie begins. But just like that time my father promised he wouldn't be absent from my life, it's somewhat of a false start, lulling you into a false sense of security of what you're going to expect from this movie coming off the backs of the previous ones. Just like you'd expect, the movie begins in the style of found footage of someone filming the wedding of Coldo and Clara. Coldo's younger cousin Adrian is filming with his camcorder, while another man who Adrian looks up to, Atun, is filming with a professional rig. Surprisingly for a Spanish wedding, things seem to go quite smoothly, apart from one of the guests, Coldo's uncle Pepe, talking about how a dog at his clinic had recently bitten him due to Spanish people tending to taste quite nice. That's where the genesis part of the title must come from, as I interpret it as a double entendre, not just because Phil Collins was also born from a demonic Spanish infection, but with it already being established in the previous two movies that a sick dog from the lockdown apartment complex alerted the authorities to the infection that led to the events of those movies. After the wedding, they all arrive at the reception hall, a large fancy country retreat filled to the brim with all that fancy olive oil, or whatever it is that Spanish people like to drink these days. Clara tries to pull Coldo aside to tell him something serious, when suddenly the music starts to play, causing him to be distracted by the love of his life, and their conversation ends. The night goes on with lots of partying, dancing and drinking, and after it's got to the point where most people have had more than their fair share of drinks, Adrian decides to film the children's entertainer who's dressed up as SpongeBob. Or should I say Sponge John, due to a recent copyright-related incident. But while filming him, Adrian manages to capture Pepe on camera beginning to throw up, with Adrian just laughing it off, thinking that he's had a bit too much to drink and needs to go for a siesta. After noticing some people scouring the grounds while wearing protective clothing just as police arrive, they decide to head back inside to rejoin the rest of the party, because whatever that is can't be important, when suddenly Pepe, now high up on the second floor indoor balcony, decides to show everyone his cool backflip and throws himself backwards off onto the table below, due to Pepe always needing to be the center of attention. After everyone comes running to see if Uncle Pepe's finally lost the plot, he bites into his wife's neck, ripping out a large chunk of flesh as he gives her a Spanish love bite. From this point on, all-out chaos ensues, as suddenly infected police officers from inside come running into the building, something which I'm not actually too sure how occurred, considering that Pepe is supposed to be the genesis of all this. Maybe they've just got lots of infected dogs running around Spain or something. But silly Spanish people aside, the wedding reception starts to resemble an insane clown posse concert, with people being torn to shreds and eaten all around. In the commotion, Coldo is separated from Clara, but he does find her little sister Tita. Coldo, Adrian, Tita, Atun, and another man named Moncho lock themselves in the kitchen to leave everyone unfortunate enough to not be in the kitchen to be turned into human tapas. Coldo realizes that Atun is still filming despite everything that's going on, so he throws his camera to the floor and destroys it, with the movie finally giving us a title card almost 22 minutes in, with me honestly just kind of forgetting that we hadn't already seen one at this point. The camera being destroyed represents more than pure unbridled Spanish rage. It represents growth, a change in the series, like those strange lumps on my testicles, growth being something that you just can't ignore. From this point on, the movie switches from found footage to a traditionally shot movie, albeit apart from another scene literally 2 minutes from now, but after that I promise. It then represents the transition to a traditionally shot movie. Something which honestly feels quite jarring at first, as while the found footage genre has been run into the ground more than your average Boeing plane lately, the original two Rec movies succeeded with conveying that cramped, close, personal and panicked feeling thanks to their found footage approach. Oh yeah, also the motion sickness. I can't forget that. Which does create noticeable growing pains, as the style in which it's shot changes instantly, with it also instantly taking me out of the movie and reminding me that I am in fact watching a movie. A feeling that you really shouldn't be trying to convey with your film. Something which I wouldn't have felt the full effect of if the movie was fully shot in the traditional sense, but something I do understand the inclusion of. It was time to do something different, and they wanted to convey that to the viewers. A change which I feel references the internal monologue that I have with myself in my head. Not about where all the bodies are located, but the same thing that I think every time things start to go bad in a found footage movie. Why are you still filming? Wouldn't you just drop the camera and focus on trying to stay alive? Calder realizes that Moncho wasn't a part of the family, and he explains that he's actually there to be a copyright inspector, someone to keep track of all of the songs that are played to ensure that the correct amount of royalties are paid for playing those songs, like a music tax collector. While they're locked in the kitchen, they notice a grate in the ground, so Atun pulls out his trusty pocket knife, because you never know when you're going to need one of those in a country as dangerous as Spain, when suddenly Moncho, who all the others refer to as royalties, tries to take over in a panic, causing him to knock the Swiss Army knife out of Atun's hand, followed by it falling through the grate for no one to use. With someone being in charge of enforcing copyright unsurprisingly making a terrible decision, they're then forced to flee through an air vent. An air vent that Atun knows he isn't going to be able to fit through, despite being in a kitchen and surrounded by perfectly good butter that he could easily grease himself up with. Atun hands Adrian back his camcorder and tells him to use the night vision in order to make his way through the vents, in a reference to the previous movies and their inclusion of night vision, while also being a reference to the fact that this thematically doesn't make any sense at all, as the movie has gone from found footage to traditionally shot and now back to found footage, before then going back to traditionally shot, where it then proceeds to stay for the entirety of the film. In that case, why bother going through with the symbolic messaging of having the camera be destroyed and the type of presentation being changed, just to immediately throw it back in as a gimmick immediately straight after, to never once be used again? At first, I thought perhaps this movie would be switching between both styles after this, but nope, the first two movies used night vision, so we need to make sure we get a shot of that too. After making it through the air vents, they find themselves in the gardens before quietly making their way over to the police car that Adrian spotted earlier, where Coldo discovers one of the guests munching on the Spanish sausage of one of the police officers. She grabs onto him, wanting some more, so Adrian wraps a fire hose around her neck, as Royalties files a false copyright claim against her while using a tire iron. He then proceeds to try and use the radio in the police car, leaving himself open to be bitten by said police officer. During the scuffle, the siren is set off, alerting all of the nearby infected to their exact location. They then find themselves surrounded by the infected outside of a church after heading off into the trees, when suddenly the door opens up and their grandmother lets them in and tells them that the zombies can't come inside. Not just because they're not welcome, but because they're ungodly abominations. Like the Scottish. The church is full of survivors, but not the one that Coldo is looking for. Trying to figure out where his wife must be, suddenly her voice begins talking over the PA system, where she announces to him that she's fine and hiding with the wedding priest, and the thing that she was trying to tell him earlier is that she's pregnant. Gross. Overwhelmed with emotions, Coldo goes from being extremely happy to crying, to realizing that it isn't now just the love of his life who's in danger, but also the life of his unborn child. While looking at a statue of St. George while wondering what he's going to do, St. George being a warrior saint who that one time in history killed a dragon, look it up, he realizes that he needs to fight. But luckily for him, he's in a holy place, which means he's surrounded by armor and weaponry. Coldo and one of the employees, who tells him she must be in the control room to make that announcement, suit up and head out after her. Clara is able to watch the chaos unfolding within the building through the monitors, when suddenly the priest tells her that this is Genesis. It's like the Noah's Ark Great Flood, except with Spanish people. The control room doesn't prove to be safe for very long, as it's suddenly attacked by a group of the infected, forcing Clara and the priest to use a fire hose to climb down to the floor below. A floor where they then discover Clara and Coldo's friends Rafa and Natalia sleeping with each other while blissfully unaware of the carnage that's erupting in the rest of the building, and not just in Rafa's underwear. Clara and her group of buddies then attempt to try and sneak their way out, where they're then almost immediately confronted by a group of the undead, who they then see in the reflection are actually just possessed creatures like Tristana from the previous movies, all the way down to the choice of undies. And considering that this outbreak started due to the infected dog from the same building as Tristana, it makes sense that all these would be connected to the tall Portuguese lady. The priest is grabbed and is about to be served up as a holy snack before he starts reciting an ancient spell, a prayer, causing the infected to completely stop in place and become incapacitated due to to his voice really just being that annoying. Koldo's guide is then immediately grabbed and pulled behind a curtain, causing Koldo to casually walk away from him as if he didn't just see that, before coming across the control room completely empty. And as he enters, you can see a TV at the top of the screen showing news coverage of the events outside of the apartment complex, meaning that the events of the previous two movies are happening simultaneously to this. And while in the control room and having access to the cameras, Koldo watches as the group from the church, including the little children and the elderly, attempt to make it to a bus to escape. And despite one of the survivors keeping a few of the undead at bay with his firearm, the infected are eventually able to swarm the bus, with Koldo not being able to do anything but watch as the members of his family, including his cousin Adrian, his grandmother, and Clara's little sister Tita, be eaten right before his eyes. After seeing the reflection of a demon in the monitor behind him, Koldo plants his mace into the infected skull, before it then cuts back to Clara, Rafa, and Natalie, trying to maneuver through the dark, before coming across an armed Sponge John, who will defend the Krabby Patty secret formula by any means necessary. After coming across the defender of Bikini Bottom locked and loaded, Clara and old friend Natalie have a bit of a moment together, when suddenly a zombie, jealous of their friendship, jumps through a window and tears a chunk out of Natalie's neck, right in front of Clara. The group are then just about able to get away from the infected person by dropping a shutter grate between them and the zombie, only for Clara to then be alone as Rafa and Sponge John go ahead to check if it's safe, when suddenly her mother appears. Her infected mother. She's got herpes. Extremely happy to see her daughter on her wedding day, she attempts to remove her internal organs and begins sprinting at her, before suddenly being shot down by Sponge John, with her mother and her friend being killed right before her very eyes, in the span of about 2 minutes, thanks to a trigger-happy Sponge Man. And speaking of Sponge Joy, he's then immediately attacked and killed by a group of zombies, causing Clara and Rafa to run away from him, leaving his gun behind. They come across an underground tunnel that they think they can use to escape the place, where we then see that Koldo makes it back to the reception room to find the place completely destroyed. Clara and Rafa have the opportunity to escape, discovering an exit, but Clara refuses to leave without Koldo. Not even knowing if he's alive, Rafa tells her that Koldo is likely dead, because if he were alive, he would have used a signal or something by now to let her know, immediately followed by him using a signal or something to let her know. While his and Clara's wedding song plays in the reception room, he goes up to the music controls and turns them up loud enough that somehow she can hear it, despite being deep underground. The Spanish, with their unusually good long-distance hearing, then decide that they're going after Koldo, where Clara picks up a chainsaw used for cutting up firewood. Clara cuts the bottom off her dress to allow herself more freedom of movement, and it goes from Koldo trying to save Clara to Clara trying to save Koldo. They're trying to save each other. Koldo ends up back in the kitchen for a little snicky snacky snoo when he comes across a ton. He's dead and he's opted for opening up his own arms instead of facing the infection. And after his body falls to the ground, it reveals his Uncle Pepe standing right behind a ton's body, looking like he's about to get up to some mischief. And by getting up to some mischief, I mean attempting to eat his nephew by forcing himself onto a knife wielded by Koldo for the chance to try and bite his neck. After discovering that Pepe's breath smells really bad, Koldo attempts to use the Spanish tradition of brushing his teeth with a hand blender, which has the unfortunate side of killing him, but also curing him of his bad breath, due to curing him of his ability to breathe. Clara and Rafa spot zombies in the tunnel, but by this point Clara's done enough running and instead decides to fight. Except she can't seem to start the chainsaw, so proceeds to use it to bludgeon the zombies with, before knocking one of them to the ground, where she then finally manages to turn the chainsaw on as the blades rest against the creature's face, causing it to be sliced down the middle, starting at its skull. And after she's done creating identical Spanish twins, she turns to see someone giving Rafa a succulent sloppy kiss on the neck, so proceeds to run them through with a chainsaw before slicing them in half as well. Rafa then falls to the ground and can visibly be seen starting to turn, but due to Clara being the good friend that she is, doesn't even bother waiting for him to fully turn and instead just slices his head off with the chainsaw while he's still perfectly conscious and very much aware of what she's about to do. Back in the kitchen, Koldo notices the sword used for the cake cutting ceremony, because in Spain you need to cut cakes with swords or else the cake monsters might escape. Suddenly, he spots Clara below him, and she climbs up the ladder to discover that the grate is still locked, followed by him telling her about the Swiss Army knife. Something that he would have been much better off telling her about before she climbed all the way up there, as after she heads back down to find it and starts climbing back up again, a horde of the infected appear and begin climbing up after her. But luckily for Clara, she's armed with the perfect self-defense weapon, high heels, and is able to lobotomize her attacker with one swift kick. and just as she manages to make it up to her new husband, where they then proceed to do a little cry, suddenly the zombies from the reception room start entering the kitchen. With no way out, they both accept that this is the end for them, when suddenly someone starts reading scripture over the PA system, causing the infected to be stuck in place, as it's the priest who she just kind of abandoned earlier. With the infected now frozen in place, thanks to this awesome new song playing over the speakers, they're able to walk through the main reception room past a large horde of the infected family members as they're all stuck in place. After making it outside, Clara is then attacked and bitten by an elderly short Spanish man, Coldo's grandfather, who couldn't hear the scripture due to his hearing aid playing a loud, high-pitched sound in his ear, causing him to be completely unaffected. That is until Coldo then stabs his own grandfather through the torso with a giant sword. The infection can be visibly seen spreading down Clara's arm, so without hesitation she places it on a bench and tells Coldo to chop it off. And being a really big fan of Evil Dead, he does. Being happy with the fact that he's forever going to be able to ask her if she needs a hand or anything for the rest of her life, his joy is once again cut short as they find the perimeter of the hotel being locked off, just like the apartment complex was in the previous two movies. Clara then suddenly starts to puke after realizing that Coldo is going to use that stupid joke on her for the rest of her life, and turns to him to reveal a bloodshot eye. Knowing that she's infected or either just really stoned, Coldo picks her up anyway and walks through the front gate to be greeted by a group of armed police officers, followed by him giving her a big kiss right in front of them all. Something which causes her to become a bit overly excited, as she then proceeds to bite off his tongue as they're all unloaded on by the police officers, with that not exactly being the type of penetration that they had in mind to consummate their marriage. So before this video comes to an end, I'd like to just give a big shout out and a massive thank you to all of the YouTube members and patrons, the people who every month continue to go out of their way to help support the channel. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or patron yourself, not only are you just generally being a great support, but you also get access to a few little perks, like being able to join the private Discord server, where you can then get links to all uncensored versions of videos. Starting off with this week's new YouTube signups, a massive thank you to Luak War 312, Gadzoman, Jablisly Lasure, Paceo2, Dandan, KST, McMonster Gaming, Mert Kavami, Jim Pareta, Luca Guarneri, Egepoi Raz, Amoli Dunzo, Phoenix, Original 2667, Justin Paws, and Adolf Rizzler. Now heading over to this week's new Patreon signups, a massive thank you to KTR, Dustin Zingale, Colton Davidson, Hannah Penne, Totally Not Noah, Huangle Kentu, Stephen Lamontang, Wavy CR, Roald, KJ, Anjolska, Walter White, and Lisa Jervis. So once again, a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a big thank you to everyone else for watching.